Good morning and good afternoon. A big welcome to the AAM Environment and Climate webinar. And I am Joyce Lee, the chair-elect of the network and your host today. ESG, environment, social, and governance is a topic that could still be a bright spot in these uncertain times. Endowment funds are money that museums already have, and these funds can be used to impact society by the choices of investment. So I'm going to go over some housekeeping items. We encourage you to ask questions early so they can be upvoted. You'll see the thumbs up. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Shannon Surdick, Heather McCafferty, and Sari Custer, who have been getting us ready for this webinar, moderate the chat room, as well as creating surveys. So we also want to thank our network co-chairs and committee chairs for bringing this topic far and wide. We have over 200 registered today. Next, please. Very important are our co-sponsors. We have so many today covering all of the United States and Canada. Your subject matter expertise and on-the-ground knowledge give us so much insight. So I'm just going to read clockwise. Southeastern Museum Conference, Association for Science and Technology Center, the Museum Trustee Association, Georgia Association of Museum, Pennsylvania Museum Association, the Association of Midwest Museum, Western Museum Association, the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums, Mountain Plains Museum Association, Canadian Museum Association, the New England Museum Association, Texas Association of Museum, American Institute for Conservation, the Association of Children's Museum, and the California Association of Museums. Thank you again for your support and for your wisdom. Next. We are in exceptional company today. We will start by inviting Charles Kazmaier to give us opening remarks representing the AAM board. So happy that you are with us today, Charles. Please.
Thank you, Joyce, and welcome everybody. What a fantastic group to be speaking today. Thanks, Joyce, for chairing the AAM Professional Network for Environment and Climate Change and for gathering today's session and engaging so many partnering organizations. I'm Charles Katzenmeier, Vice President for Advancement at the Field Museum in Chicago. Not all museums have an opportunity to work directly in conservation, studying and mitigating the effects of climate change. But this is one of the great issues of our time. It affects all of us, which makes conversations of sustainability and resilience central for all museums. AAM places sustainability at the center of its work for museums and the communities served by museums. I'm certain many of you are familiar with Larry Fink, the founder and chairman of BlackRock. In his letter to CEOs for 2021, helps to place the Paris Accord and a goal of a net zero economy further into the mainstream. Companies with environment, social, and governance profiles outperform their peers. He stated what we all have sensed, that sustainability isn't just the right thing to do, it's sound management, the smart thing to do. And so some housekeeping about AAM and then back to our panel and our topic today. If you're part of today's discussion, you're probably one of the do-goodniks in the world, and the museum community is filled with you, thank you. You probably are very close or should be close to museum advocacy. I'm sorry to say that registration for this year's AAM Advocacy Day is closed, but thanks to all who have registered. And for everyone, there are resources on the AAM website that can help any of us conduct everyday advocacy for our institutions. And finally, let me offer a shameless plug for the AAM annual meeting, May 24th and June 7th to 9th. Early bird registration ends on March 3rd. Our increasingly global museum community comes together for 4 days of learning and networking, and it's not to be missed, and we hope that everyone will be a part of it. Again, thank you all for this topic. I'm thrilled to turn this over to our expert panelists, and thanks again, Joyce, for today's session, and to all of you who are here.
Wow, thank you, Charles. Stephanie Radcliffe is the CEO of the Wild Center in upstate New York. Thank you, Stephanie, for taking a lead to steer us towards the ESG direction. And she will in turn introduce the speaker. Please, Stephanie.
Joy. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Stephanie Radcliffe, Executive Director of the Wild Center, a science museum in the Adirondack Park in upstate New York. Museums hold and manage millions of dollars in their respective endowments. And like colleges and universities, the public, donors, and the scientific community have called upon museums to examine their policies and investment choices. Investing within your organization's value system directly aligns your mission with your actions. This webinar will unpack what you need to know to initiate this conversation with your museum leadership or board. New tools and indexes within the investment industry now allow for a robust and verifiable comparison of social impact investing with traditional investment strategies and approaches. I'm speaking to you today from a very humble place, and I suspect I'm just a small step ahead of many of you listening to this session. While my organization has developed many programs about climate change, we are just beginning to discuss our investments as one of the actions we can take as an organization to protect the environment and align our administrative policies with our programmatic work. This is a time when we're all trying to understand and see embedded dimensions in our established practices. Maintaining a business as usual attitude is keeping the world just as it is. For the Wild Center, we're asking ourselves, how can we offer many programs on climate change, proudly tout our green campus attributes, and then not take a hard look at how we manage our organization's investments? Sustainability practices of companies is relevant to the Wild Center, but it's only one dimension we can examine as we make investment choices. And this is what you're going to hear about in this session today. This session is intended to provide you with the background you need to start this conversation with your board investment committee. Additionally, this will also give you knowledge to make these same decisions for your personal investment and retirement accounts. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we're going to hear from Lloyd Kurtz, who is Senior Portfolio Manager and Head of Social Impact Investing with Wells Fargo Private Bank. Lloyd is an expert in social impact investing and will deliver an overview of how the investment field has rapidly evolved in recent years in response to client requests for full transparency of their portfolios. We'll then hear from Richard Picciantini, President and CEO of the Phipps Conservatory and Botanic Garden in Pittsburgh, along with his board chair, Walt Berlick. They will tell us their story about developing strategies and policies incorporating environmental, social, and government factors into their Botanic Gardens investment management policies and practices. It's a process and it probably takes longer than you think. Caleb Touton will then walk us through, who is an investment management research analyst and sustainable investing lead at Wells Fargo Investment Institute, Inc., will provide an overview of how asset managers are constructing portfolios that move beyond simply excluding companies. Caleb will walk us through some of the elements to understand how investment specialists can build a socially aligned investment portfolio so each museum can meet their specific objective of their museum's desire to align their values and mission with their investment policy. So to get started, I'm going to hand it over to you, Lloyd. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. A couple of remarks today, and we'll share a couple of slides as we go along, but not many. I think the main point to make, hopefully you'll take away, is that this is a field that is growing very rapidly. It's very diverse. And there's a lot of innovation underway in both practice and in the client side. A friend of mine, Brian Bruce, who's the editor at the Journal of Investing, recently surveyed the top 30 global asset managers to determine which ones had capabilities in the ESG area, environmental, social, and governance assessment. And the response was all of them do. Every large asset manager now has this as part of their product offerings, part of their structural capability, part of their infrastructure. From yesterday's Financial Times, there's an article, European funds rush to adopt ESG strategies. Forgive me for reading, but it's brief. Rising demand for sustainable investment prompted managers to change the strategy or profile of 253 European funds in 2020, helping push regional assets invested in funds with an ESG tilt to a record 1.1 trillion, according to Morningstar. In addition, 505 new ESG funds were launched. The asset management industry is a global industry. Europe is certainly ahead of the US on the institutional side. We've seen aggressive institutional investment in ESG really for the past 10, 15 years in Europe. The US has not really followed suit. In my world, the wealth. We'll talk today a little bit about what some of those innovations look like. I think the first question we get is, what is this? What are we doing here? Here's my attempt at a definition. Modern responsible investment strategies help clients align portfolios, integrate ESG factors into the investment management process, and include robust engagement capabilities to achieve impact. So there's three big dimensions to what we're doing. And in modern practice, you'll see products that just have one of these. A tobacco fund, a fund that avoids tobacco would only probably be an alignment fund. There's other funds, hedge funds will say, we don't really care about aligning with values, but we've noticed that there's some risk reward benefit in these databases. And so they might be doing ESG integration without much thought for values alignment or anything like that. And we have impact funds that they're not trying to exclude anything. They're not worried about risk or reward. They're just trying to put capital on the target, trying to put money to work in a way that's going to improve things. We see all three of these out in the wild, and we see every imaginable combination of these three. We're in a period of great innovation and ferment in our industry, and the result is a great moment for your organization to look at what's going on and consider some of the product offerings that are out there. For each of the three categories I've mentioned, there's one other word I'd ask you to think about. For ESG integration, we're usually focused on financial materiality. So if I'm an asset manager, when we're looking at whether to include a stock in our strategies, one of our questions would be, is there something about the company's environmental, social, governance performance that gives it a competitive edge? An airline that treats people, customers, and employees particularly well might have an advantage over an airline that treats them badly. It's sort of an obvious insight, but it's also powerful insight. And there's work by Alex Edmonds, currently a professor at London School, but he did this London Business School, but he did this when he was at MIT. And he found that companies with happier employees tend to beat the market over long periods of time, even after making really rigorous risk adjustments. And he traced that to greater productivity by the employees. So sometimes a big part of what we're doing, both in finance and academia, is proving or trying to disprove the obvious. But there's pretty good empirical data going back multiple decades now showing that better employers have had better fundamentals and better stock market returns. Now that Alex has published it and everyone knows, a lot of those assets will be repriced. So it'll be tougher to get that advantage in the market anymore. But that's just one example. We really don't know how many of these ESG factors are out there that could be integrated into a successful investment strategy. So the race is on, products are being launched. And financial materiality is a big part of the conversation. Impact is trickier because we don't have any one definition. We know everyone wants it. When we put money to work in the market, wouldn't it be great if that money was going someplace good? And that can be as simple as buying a municipal bond that finances a school instead of a jail, or it can be a very complex fund that's using all kinds of fancy metrics to determine the social or environmental impact of the investments it holds. In public markets, we get impact mainly through engagement, mainly through talking to companies about ESG performance and best practices. Most of the high-level teams in the industry do some of this now. Under the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, which many large asset managers have signed, engagement is an obligation. We promise not to be passive owners of the stock, but to talk with the company about how it's going. So that's how we get impact. And then alignment, the key word there is exclusions. This is what a lot of people would call SRI or SRI 1.0, where we're just saying we don't want, there's certain things we don't want to own. And there's a lot of talk now that this is an obsolete technique, but actually we're seeing that it's our fastest growing technique because of the interest in fossil fuel free investing. A lot of clients have simply thrown up their hands and said, I never want to see another oil company in my portfolio. And so in those instances, they're excluding to improve their alignment with their sustainability values. So all three are out there. And ultimately, when you're assessing an asset manager, in addition to the traditional assessment of risk and reward, is it a good asset manager? Do they manage risk well? Do they fit into our overall mix of asset managers? You probably want to think about these as well. What's the mission of our organization? Is the manager well aligned, or can they create strategies that are well aligned with our mission? Are they committed to ESG integration? And is there some way that they can help deliver impact? I can't think of any manager that gets an A in all five of those classes: reward, risk, integration, impact, and alignment. So you'll have to decide which of these is the most important for you. I'm going to just pause on each of these and give you one example for each one, and then I'll return this back to Stephanie. But for ESG integration, the biggest single issue is climate change. We're seeing very large institutions now, including large universities, moving to a fossil fuel-free posture. That's because ESG integration is supposed to be about risk and reward. And when you look at the ESG landscape, the biggest risk out there, biggest systemic risk, is climate change. If you look at carbon concentration in the atmosphere, it just goes up and up every year. And it seems unlikely to stop anytime soon. So many organizations out here in California, Stanford and UC Berkeley, are moving to a fossil fuel-free posture. Faith-based organizations, the Pope has started to promote fossil fuel-free investing. So thinking about the carbon footprint of the stocks in the portfolio, even if you don't go fossil fuel-free, you might want to ask your manager, can you tell us about the carbon footprint of the portfolio we own? Are we above average? Are we below average? Our team at Wells gets that report regularly, and it impacts what assets we own. We want to have a good carbon footprint. We want to deliver to our clients a portfolio that is not overly exposed to climate risk. Climate risk is tricky because it's in the nature of risk. When you don't know what's going on, you have more risk. And with climate, as the carbon concentration in the atmosphere rises, we get further away from a world we really know a lot about. So one of the criticisms of scientists sometimes is that they're alarmist. They talk about worst case scenarios and bad outcomes. But if you're a risk manager, that's what you're supposed to be doing. As investors, we're supposed to be looking at that and reducing our exposure to bad outcomes. So that's ESG integration. There's a whole organization, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, looks at the financial materiality of different issues. Mike Bloomberg's one of the key funders of this. You can go to sasb.org, SASB.org, and you can see the complexity of their model, but they have done an enormous amount of work over the past decade to define for every industry what are the material ESG issues we need to worry about. With respect to impact, we've seen a big change. Companies have become much more receptive, and we're seeing even large companies reach out to us, which even 5 years ago would have been unheard of, to talk with us about ESG issues and ask our advice. Our team, and I think most quality institutional teams, are following a model that is not what I would call activism. It's engagement. It's non-confrontational. We had a large retail company that was not reporting to the Carbon Disclosure Project. That's important, and most S&P 500 companies do that now. And this company was a leader in a lot of other respects. We called them and talked with them about that and just said, maybe you should. Maybe you should be reporting this data out. Really helps capital markets figure out where companies stand, and we think you'd actually grade out pretty well. And so they did so. So it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't a drama. It wasn't a confrontation. None of it was public. But we and I think a lot of other asset managers nudged that company toward better practice in the climate reporting space. And the more we can do that with, and the more companies we can do it with, the better overall outcome we'll get. I'll conclude on this slide. I think one of the things that has bedeviled us is the definition. For many years, when I would talk about this with audiences or with clients, they would say, well, how do you define social responsibility? And in the end, I think it boils down to the institution, to the organization, and to the person. What's your mission? But we've never had a global framework until a couple of years ago. The United Nations published the Sustainable Development Goals. You can find these online with a lot of detail, a lot of metrics behind them. And so another way to think about any investment you'd be considering would be, how well does that investment line up with the Sustainable Development Goals? And which Sustainable Development Goals line up best with your organization? This is a fantastic aspirational framework. No one gets an A on this test, and it's designed specifically to promote positive change. So you should go in with the expectation that you'll be pleased with some things and disappointed in others, whether it's your investment portfolio or the way your asset manager tracks these things. But if you're looking for a base framework around the global concept of sustainability, I think you can do a lot worse than this. And this framework is what we use in our engagement efforts. We try and talk with companies about matters that are on this framework and impact their financial profile. Other asset managers might do it differently, but we found that this is just a really useful rubric for thinking through the concepts of social responsibility. So Stephanie, with that, I'll step back, and hopefully that gives us a good introduction to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. And I invite everyone to start putting your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom link. And we've saved about 15 minutes at the end of the session, so we've saved lots of time. So go ahead and put your questions in for Lloyd if you have something specific for Lloyd, and we will we'll get to these at the end of the session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Richard and Wally, and please tell us your story of your organization. I personally find it very inspiring, and that's what I aspire to accomplish at mine. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Piacentini. I'm the President and CEO for Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our investment strategy at Phipps, but also I'd also tell you a couple of the key steps on how we got to where we are today, just to help everyone get their bearings straight. A second. Phipps is located in Pittsburgh, which is in Southwest Pennsylvania. And it opened in 1893, the original conservatory. And it was a gift to the city of Pittsburgh from Henry Phipps, who was a partner of Andrew Carnegie's in the steel business. And it was given at a time when people thought there were no limits to the amount of pollution we could produce or the amount of natural resources we could use. In fact, people thought we were going to conquer nature. Now, fortunately, most of us today realize that's not true. And fortunately for us, those of us in Pittsburgh no longer looks like this either. But the conservatory was run by the city of Pittsburgh for 100 years. and then in 1993 was turned over to a nonprofit organization. We immediately got started on developing a master plan to look at replacing some of the dilapidated facilities and improve our visitor amenities. Along the way, we ended up building 3 very high performance super green buildings. And in 2006, because of those buildings, our board got very interested in sustainability, and they decided to change our mission statement to include to advance sustainability and promote human and environmental well-being through action and research as part of our mission statement. That led to our opening the Center for Sustainable Landscapes in December of 2012, and it was and still is one of the greenest buildings in the world. It is the first and only building to have met the Living Building Challenge, LEED Platinum, WELL Platinum, CITES Platinum, and BREEAM Outstanding all in one building. And as we were doing that, we began to realize that human and environmental health are inextricably connected. We also began to realize that when we look at some of the major problems we have in the world today related to the environment and human health, we find that we tend to focus on the symptoms of the problem and not the real cause of the problem. And the real cause of the problem is really related to the lifestyles that we lead. And we could see this play out in many of our cafes on a daily basis. We tend to serve a lot of highly processed, unhealthy food and junk food on single-use disposable plastic serviceware. Not a good way to enhance human or environmental health. So for us, we decided to get on this journey to start really looking at everything we do related to our buildings and our programs and how it affects the environment and how it affects human health. And we decided as we were doing that, it was really important not only to just talk about these things, but to actually start to walk the talk. And a good example for us, again, can be found in our cafe. At Phipps, we have a lot of children that come to Phipps. We have a lot of programs for children, and we decided it didn't make sense for us to be talking about children's health and serve junk food and soda in our cafe. So 10 years ago, we stopped selling junk food and soda in our cafe. We then got very focused on addressing climate change and really started to look at fossil fuels and our use of fossil fuels, and also tried to look at how can we get our investments out of fossil fuels. And this was like 6 years ago, before ESGs started becoming very popular. And we really were having a real hard time trying to understand where can we draw the line about where we can invest and where we won't invest. And around that time, something called the Carbon Underground 200 came out. And this organization identified the top 200 oil and gas reserve owners in the world. They ranked them by the top 100 coal companies and the top 100 oil and gas companies. And we looked at this and we said, well, finally, we have a way to put a box around this problem. And we could identify the organizations that we want to make sure that we have no investments invested in any of these companies. So we went to our finance committee in the summer of 2015. We talked through this with the finance committee. And then finally in September of 2015, both our finance committee and executive committee voted to approve eliminating fossil fuel investments from our endowment funds and other investments. In October of 2015, our full board actually approved this, but they also expanded it. They said they also wanted us to see us be invested in environmentally responsible ways other than just fossil fuels. So it wasn't until April of 2017 that we were actually able to hire a new investment advisor and actually implement these investments. Now, you might ask the question, what took so long between October of 2015 and April of 2017? Well, first of all, we had to identify what these other areas that we didn't want to invest in were. So we started looking at all the things that related both to our mission statement and some of the primary initiatives that we have at the conservatory. We also started by talking to our existing investment advisor, and after spending many months going back and forth with them about how we might be able to do this, they finally told us, you know what, we're not the right company to help you with this. We're going to have to withdraw from being considered for this kind of sustainable investing. So that led us to have to put out a request for proposals for a new investment advisor. We finally did select that advisor. We selected Brown Advisors, and like I said, in April of 2017. And we focused our investments on some typical ESG screens, but also we had some negative screens like the Carbon 200 Underground list. And we also wanted to screen for junk food, pesticides, tobacco, firearms, and weapons. Right now, 65% of our funds are invested in separately managed ESG accounts, where we could also use our negative screens. And 30% of our funds are invested in ESG mutual funds that track well with our negative screens. 5% of our investments in cash, and in 2019, we also added the Banking on Climate Change as an additional screen to avoid financing fossil fuel extraction. Our return on investments has been very good. Since May of 2017, our portfolio net has been 12.1%. That's compared to our benchmark of 10%. So we've actually done much better with our ESG investments than we would have if we had just followed a typical investment strategy. I wanted to share some, before Wally tells you a little bit from the board perspective, I wanted to just share with you a number of resources that we have available that'll also be made available to you after the presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to Wally.
Hello, everyone, and I'm excited to be part of this particular discussion. From a board perspective, and Richard touched on this a little bit, and I happen to be treasurer of the organization while we were going through this process of understanding. And I think that the biggest part of this was the board sort of understanding how our mission relates to not only just the work we do at the Botanical Garden and Conservatory, but also how it relates to everything that we do. And part of that was a huge, not a huge amount of education in terms of helping folks understand exactly how our investments really played out in terms of what we do on an everyday basis. And we did, in fact, have a couple board members and who were investment individuals sort of give a little pushback, but ultimately, because of the education and our reliance on exactly what our mission is, we were able to move the board forward. And Richard moved or discussed the whole Carbon Underground 200. And that was really the first step in truly beginning to understand exactly how our investments work best for us. So with that work with the board and through a particular process, which really had to do with in developing our investment policy, which really helped us focus. Whenever the one who we had our investments with were like, we can't do this anymore, we began sort of really focusing on what that policy looked like. And the ability to walk the finance committee, the executive committee, and ultimately the board through exactly what that policy needed to look like really helped focus sort of what we do and how we do our investment strategy. It was a really interesting process. And then literally putting out that RFP, then took that policy and made it active in understanding exactly who we wanted to be working with and what that necessarily looked like. And Lloyd talked about alignment, and it's an interesting thing because, and also the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that's a tough thing. And Lloyd actually said not everybody scores perfect on that, but understanding exactly how that alignment needs to look within an organization and how to bring the board along in that particular strategy. Now, the great thing about it is our current investment portfolio is outperforming the indexes, and which has been terrific. And the ability to come back to the board and say, we're doing better than our indexes, and not only that, but we're doing better than a traditional investment portfolio, sort of gave confidence to the board and also helped us continue to move in that particular direction, especially about decision making as we look at the entire organization. And one of the things that has been critical, especially over this past year, is understanding how does this fit into a sort of a global consideration of how we impact our world and our community. So the other thing that as we are embedded in our particular community, and as we provide leadership in sustainability in a global fashion, one of the things that has been critical to us is as we recruit board members, they're asking the question about our investments. And it really becomes a total plus to be able to recruit new board members, because folks are becoming more sophisticated in terms of how they think that the investment strategy should work, especially on sustainability and climate change. And other things also. If you look at the 17 things that Lloyd put up there, folks want to know that they're working for an organization that's really trying to do good. It's also good because in recruiting employees, knowing you work for an organization that has this particular sort of philosophy and policy, you tend to, the ability to attract individuals that are dedicated and care about exactly how you do what you do has been a real upside. And then the last thing I'll mention is, as an institution within Pittsburgh, the ability to show leadership within the community, especially around these particular policies. And I can tell you that a number of universities within the city have looked toward FIPS, as well as other institutions have looked toward our investment policy as an example. And it really demonstrates to the community our leadership, but also our commitment and sort of what we're doing. And so from my perspective, the ability to begin this process, and Richard had the timeline up, it has really, really strengthened the core aspects of FIPS, not only to go see beautiful flowers or an architecturally amazing glass house, but sort of what we believe in what we do. So I'll leave it there and I'll turn it back over to Stephanie.
And Wally and Richard, I have one quick question, and we're going to take more at the end, but someone did have a very particular question about how you are defining junk food. And let me read it in particular. I just thought it was very, so is it a blanket term for processed food? Is there a distinction made between processed food that assists people with disabilities and junk food? How are you making that specific distinction?
That's a really good question. And again, that's another one of those situations where do you draw the line? Because it's really hard to decide that. And we just decided that we would identify the top 10 largest fast food restaurants and the top 10 largest companies making things like soda and snack foods and things like that. And we would not invest in those. Again, it's not a perfect policy, but it's because it's, again, how do you draw a line around something like that? But it's a way for us to at least make some statement and some effort at trying to avoid making funds off of things that we think are not healthy.
Okay, great. Thanks. We're going to, we have some other many questions coming in, which are great. And we're going to move on now to Caleb. Caleb, why don't we start by asking you to describe what you do as an investment management research analyst, and describing in particular how you approach ESG in your role.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. And it's great to be here, everyone. I appreciate your time today. So as Stephanie, you mentioned, my role is as an investment manager research analyst, which ultimately means that for the Wells Fargo Investment Institute, I conduct due diligence on investment managers and offer an opinion or recommendation on their investment process. And my specific role is actually a little bit different in that it actually has been carved out specifically to focus on environmental, social, and governance analysis and managers that are, say that they have a specific intent to be responsible, have an impact in their portfolio, broadly sustainable. So my job is to step in and basically separate the wheat from the chaff and say who's doing this really well, who has kind of those comprehensive expertise in the area. As Lloyd mentioned earlier in the presentation, what we've seen recently is really just this explosion around the conversation of ESG. I mean, frankly, I make the joke, if you're not talking about ESG, you're probably talking about cryptocurrency, and that's just about it right now. And there's a couple underlying factors for why ESG has exploded onto the stage recently. And one I think that is very important is what Lloyd mentioned around financial materiality. And I know that there was a question in the chat around this too. What does this mean? What that means essentially is that environmental, social, and governance analysis, and really kind of the power of it, is tying these factors back to true impact on financial performance, meaning that you're focusing on those factors that, yes, are contributing to perhaps making the world a better place or not actively harming the world, but also connecting those environmental factors or your board's diversity back to specific financial performance. Like Lloyd was talking about, those companies that have their employees like working for their company more, leads to better financial performance. That kind of research is increasingly coming out. And it's my job to step in and sort of look at the processes that various investment managers are using and offer an opinion on those in today's marketplace.
That's a great overview. So as an organization begins to consider ESG investing, help us think about this process. How do we get started? And from your experience building portfolios, just tell us how to think about this. What drives the decision? Is it reputational? Is it risks? Is it everything? Performance? Just from your experience working with others, just give us some frameworks to start to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And what you mentioned, reputational risk, performance opportunity, it's really all of the above right now. We've had some great comments from Wally and Richard talking about how there was kind of this awakening where, let me put it this way. In the past, we've sort of all been fed this idea that the way to have a philanthropic impact is make all your money over here and do it by whatever means possible, make as much money as you can, and then give back over here. And whether that's from the personal side of things where you've just amassed wealth throughout your life and then you give to charity more towards the end of your life, or whether that's your organization, you try and make as much as you can in your endowment, and then your organization does good for the world using those funds over here. The power of ESG and the power of a responsible investing approach is really having taken this academic research that's showing environmental, social, and governance analysis. Not only does it not impact performance negatively, in fact, it can actually have a contribution to positive returns. And then also using that environmental, social, and governance analysis to feed into this idea of aligning your actual investment portfolio with your values so that you're not contributing negatively on this side and then almost counteracting what you did with the good work you're doing. It's pulling it all together and saying that we can do both at one time together. So that's really what we're thinking about, and why this has been happening more and more recently is with the explosion of things like a focus on financial materiality. The SASB organization, which is giving, that Lloyd mentioned, that's giving companies a framework for the kind of financial or kind of metrics related to ESG that we in the financial services industry need and want to see. That explosion has been happening. But also, if you think about the world that we live in today, which is a little bit different than it was definitely 10, 15, 40 years ago, where reputational concerns, where a viral post on social media can really compound on itself now in a way that it never did before. Environmental, social, and governance analysis can address those concerns, both at the company level, which is one of the things that you get from focusing on this and the financial benefit, but also here from a charitable organization or a museum. There's a big reputational risk for not doing this, because if you're an environmental organization that invests in fossil fuels, that's going to not only detract from your social image, but maybe donations and things like that. So what's really exciting about this space is, yes, there's sort of the negative aspect. If you don't do this, you might run into problems. But also in today's day and age, as Lloyd mentioned, there's so many more options and so many more really, really compelling investment options to be able to address this. That's, I think, one thing that's very, very exciting about today's day and age.
That's a great lead into my next question. Is there's lots of different types of museums watching and listening right now on this webinar. So help us imagine what it might look like for an art museum or a history museum or a different type of museum. I know there's sometimes there can be aspects of your diversity aspirations. So walk us through what it might look like for a couple of different types of museums.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point. I always like to say that that impact or responsible investing is like beauty in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, it really makes it's really about what your organization is. Now, there's some broad trends that have kind of been emerging as a generally responsible investment approach. I mean, there's certain things that are widely considered to be detrimental to society, and so typically, as a positively focused organization, there are some things that you generally want to exclude, things like, tobacco generally accepted to be detrimental to society. Often guns is one that comes in there. Increasingly, climate change and fossil fuels and these things related to detrimental to the climate is this kind of broad existential risk for the entire society at large. But I think your point about getting more specific is very important, because depending on your organization, you are going to have different things that are more important to you than others. As Wally and Richard mentioned, I mean, junk food and this living a healthy life is something that's important to the Phipps Conservatory. So that was one direction that they chose to go. And there's really just a litany of these different approaches. But that's really the power broadly of ESG analysis and research from the investment side of things. The idea is you're truly getting to know all of your portfolio companies and potential portfolio companies, knowing every little bit about that organization, so that when it comes to the time that you're having those conversations with an organization, an endowment, even an individual that has values aligned goals, those investment managers are now armed with the tools to really know which companies are doing what, which companies are contributing positively or negatively in different parts of society. And yes, there is a conversation, there is a difference, but today's day and age, the really exciting thing is that if you have a values aligned goal in mind as an organization, if you partner with the right financial institutions, and many of them out there now, there are the avenues to be able to address pretty much any socially responsible goal that you may have. And I think, as you mentioned, there's some that are bubbling to the surface, and I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is obviously a very important one, and one that's extremely top of mind. And that's a great example too of one that's actually been tied back to financial performance. We think about, as Lloyd mentioned, it's sort of using your intuition, think this makes sense, and then academically kind of proving that right. If you have a board or an executive structure that is more representative of the community that you're addressing, so more diverse, more women, it makes sense that you would be, as a company, better positioned to serve that community and ultimately get better returns. So that's another big one that's popping up these days, and I think also just speaks to this fact that regardless of what your mission is, you can do good while also doing very well financially.
Thanks, Caleb. So we're excited about this presentation today. We pick up the phone and we're talking to our advisors and our managers of our endowment portfolios. What are some questions we should be asking? How can we start this conversation? Give us some questions. What are the criteria or qualifications if we are in the RFP stage, which I learned from Richard and Wally is really a very pivotal time when you can really sort of think about this in a very proactive way. But help us, what should we be talking about with our current managers right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question, Stephanie, because we've talked about all the great the fact that kind of everybody is doing this now, but as with anything that's sort of new, there's a wide variety of, I guess, reasons that people are doing it. It's I guess a huge marketing opportunity right now. Everybody wants to talk about it, so you claim you're doing it. But one of, I think, the most powerful questions that you can ask your financial advisor, or your financial professional, or whatever is very simple. It's a why are you doing this? Why are you offering this? Because I think getting back to the point of intentionality, intent of a manager, of an investment manager, is very, very important. What do they believe that the value of this can be? Because, we've talked about here today that you can do very well from a performance standpoint, and you can align your values. If the investment manager is not kind of in agreement with both of these things, they're just clearly kind of trying to check a box, I think that is a red flag, and you probably can tell that pretty early on. This is a very it's not new, it's been around for a long time, but the mainstream element of this has become relatively new, and just a lack of experience is not necessarily a problem. A lot of us are very green at this, and pardon the pun. But as long as that investment manager is kind of willing to listen, willing to have a conversation with you, and kind of bring in a variety of different resources, I think that's very important, because ultimately, again, it's up to you what your values and your mission are. So you don't want to be kind of pigeonholed into a cookie cutter approach. It's really important to kind of have that conversation and have that dialogue, and make sure that financial advisor is willing to have that as well. So really the place to start is just a question of, why are you doing this? And what are the resources that you have kind of behind you that are supporting this? Because it really can't be a one man or one woman show.
And I have a great follow-up question for that. So we've all heard of greenwashing, and we're marketed to every day, and we're all kind of in a skeptical mind these days. Can you go a little deeper on maybe some things that are not working so well in ESG? What do we need to know to be educated consumers? I kind of like the way that Lloyd was talking about that, you're never going to get an A+. So maybe that's a little piece of it, but it's a step better than what we did yesterday, let's say. But tell us it, because I can also see this being a resistance, something that we might get from maybe people on our boards, or somebody who's resisting trying to move in this direction. So what are some problems we need to be aware of? And then how can we know that we're getting the right information?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important question. I mean, greenwashing is probably one of the things that keeps me up at night. And just to clarify, greenwashing is the process of essentially making what a company or an investment product seem more green or sustainable than it really is. And I run into it all the time with investment products where, essentially all they've done is change their marketing materials and not any of the underlying kind of investment processes that go into building that investment strategy. And I think it goes back to my previous answer. I mean, this is a space where authenticity is really important. And also the good news is authenticity is pretty hard to fake. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask those questions of your investment managers, to really say, why are you doing this? Why are we doing this? Can you execute on this? And don't take kind of no for an answer, or kind of fall into these same, it's a tired myth to say, oh, well, so you're choosing to give up performance because you want to be, hoity-toity, socially responsible. That's not what this is about today, in today's day and age. And so, yeah, greenwashing is a big problem. Do your manager actually believe in this? I think is a big one. As Lloyd said, everybody is claiming capabilities in ESG now, but that true authenticity, true intent behind this, I think is very important. One of the other things that I also do want to say is, obviously I'm very rosy about this. I'm a zealot, if you will, for ESG investing, but obviously this isn't a magic bullet, right? You still require true investment skill, expertise, a lot of hard work, just like regular investing. ESG doesn't solve all of that. So I think, conducting your own due diligence, being thoughtful in your process is still very important. And looking beyond kind of the pretty marketing materials, let's, really digging in and saying, is this financial institution and the services they're offering, does it feel truly aligned with what I'm looking for as an individual or organization, is very, very important here.